3 cylinders, mountain class power, unmistakably New Haven. Broadway Limited Imports proudly presents the all-new HO scale brass hybrid New Haven R3A Mountain. Handcrafted brass detail meets the weight and performance of die-cast construction, available with Paragon 4 sound and synchronized smoke, or in Stealth Series DCC ready. Bring one of New Haven's most distinctive steam locomotives to your railroad. Available now through your favorite BLI dealer. Your scenery tells part of the story. Scale Signs fills in the details. With thousands of realistic railroad, street, traffic, and business signs, plus custom artwork, Scale Signs brings every scene to life. Find the signs that your layout has been missing at scalesigns.com. Scale Signs, because the smallest details can make the biggest difference. Need a curve turnout that actually fits your layout? Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply has you covered with Roadmaster flexible turnouts. Just follow your center line on benchwork, a track plan, or even a scaled aerial image and build the turnout to match your railroad. No complicated jigs, fixtures, or fixed geometry. Roadmaster flexible turnouts from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Take 10% off with code FLEX at ohrtracksupply.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. We're going to be talking about a pretty tough topic, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're not going to live forever. We need to have a plan for all of our model railroad goods. And joining me to talk about that plan, we have Dave Owens.
Hello there. Great to be with you.
And we have Mr. John Sacerdote.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great, and glad to have you two gentlemen here. Both of you are members of the Amherst Railway Society, and I know you folks have some experience in handling estates that either have prepared well or perhaps haven't prepared so well. And that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the horror stories, and then we're going to talk about how you can avoid those horror stories and leave a lot better legacy for your loved ones. So, John, let's start with you, and let's talk a little bit about the Amherst Railway Society and how you folks, either good or bad, start to get involved with the estate side of things when a model railroader passes on to that big layout in the sky.
Yeah, it's a good place to start because we actually receive probably 2 to 3 calls a month concerning collections and what to do with them. At some point during the show, I'd like to back up a little bit and talk to folks about what you could do now in preparation for when you no longer want your collection or you happen to pass away and leave the collection. But really, basically what has happened and what happens every month multiple times are people left not knowing what the heck to do, not knowing what the heck the value of it is. So there's a bunch of things we could talk about. So let's assume we just got a call from a collection or a person. Believe it or not, generally it's the wife or the kids that call, and their dad passed away. And not to be trite or anything, but it usually takes a year for people to call us. You know, they don't want to part right away. They knew it was their dad's legacy and all they lived for, you know, and that kind of thing. So they go, nah, I don't want to part with it yet. It meant so much to them. We get all of that. We see it all the time. And one example is we clean out a basement, and we actually do that for at no cost. We will clean the basement of the railroad. And it's been years when people have seen the basement now that it's back to a basement. Every single time the people that come down start to get tears in their eyes, makes me get tears in my eyes. But seriously, I hate it. But they hadn't seen the basement like that in 25, 30 years. So it's crazy. But we want to show them how clean the place looks, that kind of thing. So anyways, back to the first scenario. Person calls us, and we want to know right away what the collection consists of. And there's the first stumbling block. No matter what you do now, later on, you've got to know what you have. So you have to inventory what you have. A lot of the guys that are really, really detailed will inventory every single thing they have. It's actually very helpful when you want to know what cars you have, what numbers, what locomotives you have, what numbers. And we have inventory sheets that we will share with you for free. That'll help you keep track of all of this stuff. But when you come to us without anything, people actually, we don't know what they have. We don't know what you have. And usually it's just boxes upon boxes of stuff. We start with a big question. Are you going to donate this to us, or do you want to sell this? And donation, then we'll take it and we'll inventory it, and then we'll do a number of things we'll talk about later. But if they want to sell it, then we'll go back to them and say, here are your possibilities. And we've got a fact sheet. It's probably 3 or 4 pages long of the possibilities of what you can do. And there's a lot you can do other than trying to go to a railroad hobby store who will ask for, 20 cents on the dollar so they could sell it and make some money. There's a lot more you can do for that. But at a minimum, we will actually take your inventory. If you don't have an inventory, we will inventory it for you, and we'll actually give you a value of what it is. So you'll know how much you're dealing with. We do all of that for free. That's just part of what Amherst Railway Society is all about. So some of these take a while. And we usually will sometimes do that at our location, at your location, if you don't want to lose it or anything like that. So we'll go through what you want to do if you want to sell it. There's a number of things you could do. You could call auction houses, and they tend to work quite well. And we've used them ourselves because the pieces go to the highest bidder, which kind of offsets the percentage that they take. So if they're taking 20%, but you're getting 20% more than if you had just sold it on some other social network or something, you end up getting a decent amount for it.
So I want to hit one thing that you'd mentioned there, John, and I think this is one of the very first mistakes that we make. And we all joke about this, and I'll ask Dave if, this is kind of the thing that we all laugh about. We buy stuff and we don't communicate with our spouse what the actual value of it is, right? We hide the receipt, we throw it away, and whatnot.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Ray. I would never do anything like that.
Yeah, now you can plead the fifth all day long, Dave, but we all know then we've all been kind of guilty of that. No, and it's not really worth that much, but but that could really stick a spouse in a bad spot, not knowing what the real value of things are.
And that's why is the point John made. If you can get to the point where you create an inventory, you can put values on there. And it's important to be realistic with these values. It's not worth what you paid for it, more than likely. Be realistic. You know what prices are like at train shows. You see prices on eBay. Put a realistic price in there, a realistic value. So the people who come next have an idea. I can't tell you how many times I've been to a tag sale or something, and there's some model trains. In fact, years ago, I put some stuff I was going to throw away, some old Tyco stuff from my original train set I got as a kid. I was going to throw it away, and we were having a tag sale. I put it out. People came over who didn't know what it was. They just saw model trains, and they thought, oh, my gosh, gold bars. And they just scooped it up and, not realizing that the stuff is of very little value. And we see that a lot in the hobby. There are people who have Atlas, Kato, scale trains. And then there are people who have 50-year-old AHM, and there's a dramatic difference in the value. So, as John said, understanding, knowing what you have, and then trying to apply a realistic value to it is really important. And especially for your loved ones. If you're not going to deal with this ahead of time before you're gone, it's really unfair to leave your wife, your children, your significant other with this situation where you've left them with a pile of stuff that they assume is of value and not giving them a sense of what it is. It's kind of unfair to do that.
Yeah, and I can imagine the stressors of losing a loved one. You're going through all of those really crummy things, right? All those very painful things, like John mentioned, the family coming down, the tears in their eyes is not only have they lost their loved one, but Now they're going through all the stressors. And maybe it was somebody who died at an older age and was more prepared. But when tragedy strikes, now you're compounding the problem by not only have you lost them unexpectedly and the things that may have to happen because of that, now they're dealing with your stuff that they really have no understanding of.
Absolutely. And I hate to say it, there are people in our hobby who will learn of something like this, know someone has died, know they have a collection, and will start calling the survivors. Hey, what are you gonna do with those trains? It's pretty sleazy, but people do
Yeah.
that, and they're not looking out for your interest, they're looking out for their own. That's why it's just so important to plan, to think about it. A lot of us have friends who are in the hobby. Talk to them, work with them, but it's just come up with a plan and don't leave your loved ones in the lurch.
So that's what we want to do, right, John? So talk a little bit more about formulating that plan and how soon should you be doing this?
You should be doing it now. As you purchase items, you should throw it in your master inventory list. And one of the columns should be, when did you buy it? Another column should be, how much did you pay for it? And another column could be, how much is it worth now? And you could go through that, over the years, or just leave it blank, and we could tell you, here's what it'll be worth now. And what we do is we'll actually do the research. We have our own eBay store, but we'll research that. We'll research all the other things that are out there. We have two major national auction houses that we use occasionally, and we'll get information on how much stuff sold for from them. So we come up with an accurate price of what things are going for now, especially with Lionel, which is an American Flyer. There's such a glut of that out there now because all of our baby boomers are of the age where they're either retired, not to play in trains anymore, passing away. And you look at those Lionel, the blue books, they're so far out of whack now because there's so much stuff out there. All this is worth $400. Well, no, it's not. It's worth $50 because that's all you'll get for it. And so we'll let you know about that stuff. But as Dave alluded to earlier, the spouses either actually, very few have an idea of what it's worth, but most of them have no clue. And that's what we're here for, to give you exactly what it's worth. That doesn't matter what he paid for it. 40 years ago, you pay $1,000 for a brass locomotive, which is top notch 40 years ago. And now it doesn't run like the plastic models do now. It's just not worth that much, which is disappointing, but we'll let you know. And some of our options are, we will inventory it for you. We will purchase the collection from you. If we think we could resell it, you could donate it to us, or we could put you in touch with these auction houses and deal with that directly through the auction houses, which works out great because you hand them all that stuff. They give you an inventory of what's sold, and they send you a check, and they list every single thing and how much it's sold for. And all of a sudden you get a decent, fair price for all of that stuff. But the first thing they're going to ask is, what do you have? And, it takes us to another side of this, and that's, have you guys insured your collection? There's a number of ways to go. But the first thing any insurance company is going to ask you is, what do you have? And how much is it worth?
Yeah.
So you've got the very first thing. You got to do an inventory.
Do you see a theme here, Ray? You got to know what you have.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's number one. And we have inventory sheets that we will share.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely share those links in our notes around the layout.com/172, including links to the Amherst Railway Society and all of their resources. So again, gathering that information, knowing what you have, and then let's talk about options for plans. You talked about Amherst Railway Society and their involvement in helping folks, in that time of need where the railroad needs to go. But you can also put together a multitude of different plans. Dave, talk about some of the options that are available in kind of thinking out, like, how do I want this stuff to go, and being in control of that, even from really beyond the grave, and be able to make sure that your wishes are carried out.
There are a variety of options. If you've got friends in the hobby, you may want some of them to have some of your models. So that's something to think about. I'd like so-and-so to have this locomotive, this train. If you belong to a club, that may be an option. You may want to donate it, or you may want to ask the club members to do a sale, to carry out a sale that would benefit your loved ones. There's another option. We had a member of my club in Torrington, Connecticut, who passed away, and he had a pretty substantial collection, and he wanted the club to have it and for us to do with it what we wanted, and we sold it at various train shows, and basically have a pile of money in our treasury that has sort of taken the pressure off of our club. We were always scraping by month to month, paying for oil. And that was a great option for us. It was something that made him happy. He was a single guy, had a beautiful layout in his basement, and it's a great collection. So there are a variety of options. If you have kids or others in the hobby, maybe they want to try and sell it via eBay. There's all these options. We talk about these on our website, amherstrailway.org/collections, where you have the different options to try and sell on your own, to go to train shows, to sell on eBay, to go to a hobby shop and see what they'll offer you, or to come to us or some other organization. I think the key is just thinking about it ahead of time and trying to talk with people who matter in your life about a plan. Hey, here's what you should do if something were to happen to me. This stuff, it's not going to pay off the mortgage, but there's value here, and I'd hate for it just to end up in a dumpster.
Yeah, and I would imagine that plan really changes through ages. I'm in middle age where, I have kids that are, preteen, and if something, God forbid, were to happen to me, I would want that stuff sold as quickly as possible because they're going to need a little bit of cash, and I would want that moved on. I have a plan. My wife has been communicated the plan. I should probably write the plan down, even though I have told my wife. But then I imagine as life goes on, your plan will likely change, as your inventory will very likely change. I know how we all are, right? We don't need another locomotive, yet somehow that need becomes a want and it becomes, your property. But yeah, imagine that those are the phases and keeping up with that. Talk a little bit about that, John.
Well, it does change.
Are you guilty of that, by the way?
No, not lately. Not that this has anything to do with this, but I recently dismantled my HO scale railroad, left a lot of the bench work because I can't see that well anymore. So I'm going ON30. So I sold everything I could. I didn't have an inventory. I didn't really at the time I sold it, didn't care. I sold it to mostly friends. As a matter of fact, I don't know of anybody who wasn't my friend who bought something. So I sold it all to friends. And with that money, I'm using it for my ON30, which I am keeping an inventory of. So I am actually much more diligent now that I'm much older and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's going to change. Just stay on top of it. And honestly, how many times, especially lately with the climate and everything, have we heard about people's basements flooding and such? My stuff is insured, and it's through a rider on my homeowners. General homeowners won't cover, for the most part, your collection, but there are alternatives. There's insurance agents out there that specialize in collections. But homeowners, talk to your homeowners and say, "Look, I've got this stuff." The first thing they're going to ask you is, "What do you got, and how much is it worth?" And they'll write a rider for you to cover all of that stuff. I had some water damage, many years ago, and they covered it. And, yes, there's a slight deductible, but it wasn't much. And I did that on purpose, but for the collection. But I got a lot of stuff. I got money to replace a lot of the stuff. So it was great. So I would definitely do something about insurance because, if your basement floods totally and you lose the whole layout, God, that's a lot of money. You don't realize how much you're putting into it over the years. A little bit here, a little bit there. 20 years go by. How much have you put into your railroad? Much more than you'll ever get back. No kidding. When we walk into a layout and here's what we do. We walk down and they say, "Do you want this layout?" And we'll go, "Nope," because we don't have any place to put it because it's generally configured for that basement and there's
Right.
nowhere else to put it. So we will strip the layout of all the buildings, cars, underneath the layout, the electronics. And if there's good looking trees and stuff, we'll actually harvest all of that stuff. So what's left is bench work. And because ballasted track, there's not much you could do with ballasted track. But if track is not ballasted, we'll try to save some of that. And then, thank God, we know a bunch of guys with skill saws, and we just literally hack the layout apart. And we've got dumpsters that we take it to. We actually throw the layout away. But all the good stuff is the stuff that's in and on and under the layout. And that changes over the years. So, people keep adding on. They went from DC to DCC, and now their layout is worth a lot more. Not necessarily the track. We've come across layouts with brass track, and we just go, whatever, because nobody wants brass track anymore. We have a few guys that think they could save the brass and take it to a junk dealer, but knock yourself out. It takes you 17 years to come up with 5 pounds of brass, but if they want to do it, that's okay, because otherwise we're going to throw it away. So there are, and that's hard for people to understand. Oh, he's been running trains on that track. We'd never resell that, and it's glued down with ballast, and you can't reuse that. There are people that will soak it in water and get the Elmers wet again and then try to clean it. It's not worth it. Not at today's cost, when you could find used unballasted flex that are out there that are at all of these train shows. So,
Dave, it sounds like John is talking a lot about, the reality of knowing what the value is, coming to terms with, listen, the value of it to what it was to you isn't going to be to anybody else.
You're right.
To a family, it's been the guy's lifelong work, and they just think it's priceless. Well, to them, it is. I get that. Yeah. But when you go to resell some of that stuff, it's just somebody has got to break it to them as to what is really going on out there. We don't care. And I mean that very respectfully. We want you to understand how much this stuff is worth and take away all the BS. Here's what it's worth. We could prove that. We could show you many different avenues of where to go. And if you don't want to listen to us, we're okay with that. We'll still clean your basement up for you for free and leave you with all the stuff of value.
Well, the Amherst Railway Society is willing to do that. Dave, it seems like it would be a lot easier for the person who owned the layout to come to terms with that and then be able to explain it to their family.
I think that's the ideal situation. Preparing, having a plan, and being ready to go. One of the things that happens in these situations is very often time is of the essence. The person who built the layout has died and the house has gone on the market. Real estate agent shows up for the initial review and says, "Oh, you got to get rid of this."
Right.
And, they want to list the house in a week. And there's this layout in the basement, which, we've seen a couple stories lately of, oh, wow, we got a house with a layout. That's not the usual situation.
Mm-hmm.
The layout needs to be out. Time is of the essence. And that's when things start getting thrown into dumpsters, when things are carelessly thrown away. And
when panic sets in,
exactly.
Right? It's a panic. And, that's one point I want to drive home, and you're talking about the differences in age. If something, God forbid, were to happen to me, there is a potential that my wife and children may have to move, and in almost, in a rapid fashion, and especially if I didn't have everything squared away. So now on top of that, now they got to deal with my stuff.
Right.
Like that there's way too much for them to handle already, let alone trying to figure out all of these things. And then also have this fathom idea that what's down in the basement is worth $1.5 million.
Right. And Ray, your listeners, they get it. They have probably had the experience of losing a parent and having had to go deal with that parent's passion, whether it was books or carpentry, all kinds of interests people have. And it's hard to do. I had to clean out the house I grew up in when my dad died. And I sure wish that had been handled when my dad was alive. It's think about your kids, think about your loved ones. Do you really want to inflict this on them? Just planning ahead, talking to your friends, coming up with a plan of how this can be dealt with is really sort of an act of love to your family, of not inflicting this additional heartache on them. That's really the key thing. If that doesn't happen, well, then there are options, and groups like our organization, the Amherst Railway Society, can lend a hand. But it's a lot better if you deal with it ahead of time.
I had a friend of mine who was passing away. I talk about him often on the podcast, and even when I was talking about my own on that April Fool's edition hosted by Joe Mame, but Mike Du Bois. And one of the ways that he took control, he was terminally ill, and knowing that that was going to happen, he took down his layout. And I always questioned, why did Mike take his layout down before he left? And then I finally understood it was his way of controlling it. And for you, it's the way you can control it, whether if you're facing a terminal illness or, hey, we're all facing terminal. We just, like I opened the show with, we're all going to pass. And this is a great way to take control. Talk about that, John, just that aspect of, that peace that comes with knowing this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, just get proactive about it. Grab one of these forms and start filling it out. It honestly doesn't take long. Just go put it on a clipboard, walk around your layout, and start inventory and stuff. It's an Excel spreadsheet, so you've got a page with cars and locomotives. You've got a page with buildings, because buildings are worth some money too. You've got a page for electronics, and then miscellaneous. So just start filling out everything you can, and explain to people what they should do. Call whomever, the Amherst Railway Society, this auction house, that auction house, and let them know, here's my inventory, come and get it and sell it and give me the best price. As long as and that's not a big plan. That's a real easy plan, but it's the inventory, and only you as the owner right now can do the inventory. You remember, honestly, we all remember what we paid for most of this stuff. And we all know what we could get generally for a price for it now. And that's what the two columns are. What'd you pay for it? When? And what do you think it's worth now? And leave another column for actually how much you sold it for, or how much you got for it, either through us or an auction house or whomever. Right. I would really discourage you from going to model railroad hobby stores, though, because they are truly in the business of trying to make money. So they'll offer you a very low price and sell it for as best they can. There's a few guys out there that are pretty straightforward about it, but I think you're better off going to these auction houses, these people that specialize in grabbing collections and taking care of it. And if the timing is right, and if you feel like standing on your feet for 20 hours, 10 hours a day, we actually allow one-time only tables at the train show. So you could sell your collection. And boy, can you sell a collection at our train show. When there's 27,000 people there.
That's a great option.
Yeah, and we help with the suggested price. You want to sell it all? And one of our best war stories is a guy had a bunch of Craftsman buildings, and his family needed money to pay taxes to the tune of almost 10 grand up in Amherst. He had all the buildings on his layout were Craftsman kids. We actually plucked them out of the railroad because they were all built on homicide bases, and put them out on a table, 2 tables one year. The family made enough money to pay taxes.
Wow.
He was a member of Amherst Railway. We comped him the table. So, and we would do that for any member. But, when you're selling stuff to the tune of $10,000, the price of a table under $200, you sell one item and it covers the table cost. So if the timing is right, otherwise, if someone passes away in February or March, we might suggest going to these smaller train shows, but it's worth the wait to go to the big train show because you'll get rid of all of it.
And that's a way to take control of your situation. Start selling that stuff on your own, and you can handle it.
Yeah, even if it's clearing out the backlog, right?
Sure.
We all have that stuff of, I bought it because I thought I was going to add it to my layout, but then, that's a great place to start.
I call it the pile of stuff that seemed like a good idea when I bought it. and we all have piles of that stuff. It seemed like a good idea when I bought it. As a matter of fact,
if you look behind Dave, you can see a lot of it now.
Yeah. Good thing this is an audio podcast, so nobody will see that, Dave, but only us. We'll keep your
thank
secret
God.
for
I,
you.
I tell
Yeah.
people that's my human head collection.
But yeah, that's exactly it. Making sure you can do the things to set everything up so that, again, and we keep hammering this, but it's so critical. And again, say it over and over and over again. Think beyond yourself. Think about the legacy you're going to leave behind. Are you going to leave the legacy of, I was the guy who never told my wife how much everything was worth. I passed away. She was scrambling. They didn't know what to do with things. There's a whole world of regret behind how things were handled or sold or who got what. And then there's hurt feelings because I promised something to somebody and it never got to that person. It went to the other. So we talked about these plans. We talked about the forms. We're going to go to Amherst Railway Society's website. We'll provide the link again in our website, aroundthelayout.com/172. But let's talk about making it legal. And Dave, can you talk a little bit on that? Like, how do we make sure that that plan is well known and followed correctly?
Well, the key thing is writing it down and making your intentions known. And the best way to go about it is to write it down. If you have an attorney and you create an estate plan, a will, that's one avenue. But if you don't even go to that extent, if you write down what your intentions are and make sure that that document is shared with somebody ahead of time, shared with your spouse, shared with your children and loved ones, that's clear. This goes to this person. Contact this guy. He agreed to help sell it. You know, that is all stuff that can be taken care of as long as you do it ahead of time. An old friend of ours, Steve Mignani, many of you may know him. I know John does. Steve had a wonderful hobby shop in Wolcott, Connecticut called the Hobby Gallery. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know Steve. And Steve had a saying, none of us owns this stuff. We just rent it. And
Yeah.
one of Steve's part of his business was to buy collections and to sell this stuff. And I'm sure some of these locomotives and freight cars have been in collections of 3 or 4 people over the years. And you just it's simple, but it's a hard step for people to take because it's a hard thing to think about. Geez, what if I'm not being here?
It's a form of currency, Dave.
Yeah.
We see this stuff passed on, but what I explain to people is we find great homes for this stuff. It always ends up at another modeler's home for another 30 or so years. And then when that guy passes on, the whole thing repeats itself. So some of the great stuff just lives on and on and on. So, people like hearing, did we find a good home for their dad's stuff and that kind of thing. And we always say, is there any one piece here that you want to keep? And we've gone so far as to even build little display cases for people on occasion. When it's a really nice piece, and we have those display cases. We'll soup them up and put them in there. I have one for a guy, long-term friend of mine that passed away recently, Dick Joyce. And I've got one of my favorite cars from his layout under glass, on a little piece of 10-inch long plexi sitting on a piece of oak in his memory. So there's all that kind of stuff. Ray, you had said something about, do you have any horror stories? And we really don't let them happen. We will go out of the way to make sure we're doing the right thing for everybody. But I've got one good story, and a guy had a collection of stuff, and he was all in a box. It was a Lionel set, and he said, "Would you give me $100 for this?" And I opened it up, and I said, "No, I will not." And he goes, "What do you mean?" And it was a pink locomotive set. 1952, 1953, they were built for women. Girls didn't like pink. They wanted to play with the regular stuff, so they were a major flop. So they stopped making them, and now they're so rare, it's ridiculous. I said, and he says, "What do you mean?" I said, "The engine alone is worth $3,000. He looked at me and goes, "What?" I said, "Sell this on eBay, sell this somewhere." He came back a couple months later. He says, "I got $3,000 for the whole set that I was going to give you for $100. I want to give you something." I said, "No. You could make a donation to Amherst if you want, but no." And I said, "Keep it. Keep all the money and do the right, stuff." But he didn't know what he had, and it was his dad's. And that's my favorite story to tell, because some people just don't have any idea. And when I saw that pink locomotive, I went, oh my God. It was the first one I'd ever seen in person.
And imagine Dad rolling in his grave when he sold it for $100 instead of the, it's like, and there it is, right? Dad had this Lionel set that was worth a significant amount of money, and yet he never likely either the son didn't listen, which is all in the realm of possibility, but it wasn't well communicated, and it certainly wasn't well documented. Hey, this thing is worth something. Make sure you get decent value out of it.
Yeah.
Good thing you guys were there to be able to help them. And we talked a lot about the Amherst Railway Society. We're very fortunate to have Amherst Railway Society, and of course the SEMA of model railroading right here in our backyard. But for folks that are listening around the world, and those that are listening across the country, kind of a little bit out of the reach of the Amherst Railway Society, let's talk about some ways that they can also try to find resources to be able to help.
Well, it all begins with making that inventory. We just can't overstress that. And then making a plan, talking with your friends, who share the hobby with you, with family, and if there is a dealer or a reseller who who you trust, who you've had a relationship with, talking to them, but just having a plan. If I could throw out another example of something that John helped someone avoid a horror show. He may not remember this, but I think as soon as I mention this, you will. A very well-known model railroader with a exquisite layout that was featured in the magazines multiple times over the years passed away. He was in a terminal. He had a terminal illness. He knew this was coming, and he reached out to John and said, "I want you to handle this for me, to take care of the sale of what's salvageable from my layout, and to get the proceeds to my wife." And John was the quarterback of that. And as unfortunately happens, this man passed away. He was that well-known, news spread. He wasn't even buried, and people were calling the wife. Hey, he promised me this. He promised me that. Have you? He said I could buy this, and she was able, because he had taken these steps to plan. She was able to say, "Well, John Sacerdote is the person you have to talk to. He's handling all of this." And I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that, John.
About a month before this gentleman died, he called and he said, "I need you to handle this," and very seriously. I hadn't even gone to the funeral yet. It was in the middle of the week. He died like on a Monday or Tuesday. This was like a Wednesday. His funeral was Saturday, and the wife was getting calls, and they hadn't even had the funeral yet. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear this. By the way, what's happening to his layout? I go, really?
Yeah, the vultures don't take long, do they?
They're out there.
This was cruel to me, but she had the answer. She goes, you call John Sacerdote and see what's going on with him. Most of them did not call, because as soon as they heard, they knew. And we were able to get her a substantial amount of money that helped her move into she's elderly herself, but she moved from way far western Mass all the way to Rhode Island to be closer to her kids. And through the sale of the layout plus her house, she was able to pay cash for a condo. So it was a great ending to a story that started really not so great. But we had spent many days out there very carefully taking apart that railroad so that we could sell the pieces that were seriously worth a lot of money.
I typically save the questions here on Around the Layout for the guests, but I'm going to ask the question of the listener and the person that's listening to this show right now. Do you want your spouse to be the one that has to field those phone calls without any backup?
That is the question to ask.
Yeah. Do you really want them while they're in their time of pain and having somebody say, hey, that locomotive is supposed to belong to me even before the funeral, while you're still trying to put funeral plans together? It's so critical to make sure that you have that person, whoever that point of contact's going to be, that knows what's going on, that can help support your spouse so that they can deal with what they need to deal with, which is the life stuff in the morning. And that person can be the one that can take that hardline stance and get those vultures to fly away and stay away.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to have that plan and to have people, this is a large community of model railroaders, and if you don't have your friends in the hobby, maybe that's something you need to think about, finding, getting to know other people and sharing the hobby. It's a lot of fun. It makes it more fun, but also when that time comes, you have some people you can rely on and not put your family through this extra difficult situation.
And maybe you got to put a little more effort into it if you don't have a large group or a trusted friend, and maybe find a group that can support it. Now, if you're out this way, Amherst Railway Society, if you're out on the West Coast, I'm sure there are a lot of great model railroad clubs that have a good reputation that could help you with this, or ask them if they are not the ones to do it. Perhaps they're going to be able to provide that resource to you to be able to guide you in a direction that you're going to be able to set up a great plan that's going to make you feel better about the whole thing. And then when you pass, your family's going to feel a whole lot better about it as well.
That's a great point, Ray. Just if the first person you talk to can't help, maybe they can refer you to someone who can, and just keep going until you find the right person for you, and evaluate those folks, get to know them, and it can't hurt to have a couple of your friends involved in the process to ensure it goes smoothly in case something happens to your primary contact.
It's not an easy topic to talk about. We all want to live forever. We all want to be able to have our trains forever, but that's just simply not the case. I'm glad we got the both of you here on this podcast to talk about this tough topic, but one that can be handled with good planning and some forward thinking. So thank you both for doing that. We're going to take a listen to the question of the month. We asked the question of the month that when you make that big trip up to the layout in the sky, what is your plan? And we got 5 great answers from our listeners who submitted them at aroundthelayout.com/question. So let's take a listen. Here we go.
Hey, Ray. This is Fran Letizia from Baldwinsville, New York. And my answer for the question of the month, what is my plan for my model trains when I pass away? I would like to gradually sell off my collection as what time goes on. I have a pretty decent sized collection at the moment that I can manage, but I would never want my collection to become a burden to my family once I pass away. And I'd like to whittle it down to a nice size to where they know what's there. And if there's anything special that they want to keep, what they can keep it, or they can sell it off or do what they want. But I would definitely highlight places where it should go if I were to suddenly pass. I've witnessed many collections over the years get put in the hands of families that simply don't know what's there. They don't know where to go with it. And they turn to clubs, they either donate it or they sell them off, but it becomes a major hassle. And I would never want to put my family through that. Thanks again, Ray.
Well, thank you, Fran. Appreciate the response to the question of the month. And Fran hits on a good point there, Dave, about thinning out your inventory now before you even get towards that point and making sure that it's manageable.
His answer is perfect. He's going to take control of the situation and he's going to manage it. And I can't think of a better plan. He's going to reduce that collection to a much smaller amount, a much more manageable amount that maybe is an easy donation, to a local model railroad club. Great plan. Clearly some good thinking is going on.
Let's take a listen to Jeff Anthony.
My name is Jeff Anthony, and I'm from Blue Hill, Maine. I've helped dispose of a number of collections, and having a plan is so important. I've picked someone who is 20 years younger than myself to help dispose of my collection. The proceeds will go to the Eastern Maine Model Railroad Club, which is my club, and 2 local animal shelters. Please leave a list of your collection and appoint a friend to help with its disposal. Leave a list of an honest evaluation of the stuff that you own so it doesn't get thrown in the dumpster. Thanks, Ray, and keep up the good work.
Well, John, he talks about 2 things there. One is the good that can be done with your model railroad, even beyond your family, supporting charities, whether it be a model railroad club or even outside of that.
Yeah, that actually was another great answer. He's already got someone appointed, almost like the executor of your model railroad estate, right? And that person will take care of things accordingly. And I think that's a great plan. I think if he has family, he needs to let his family know that this is what's going to happen. I wouldn't want like if it were me, my son would say, no, I'm going to take care of it, not you. So,
Yeah.
but and it's merely me really kind of teasing, but it is a good plan that you actually have assigned someone.
Yeah, make sure your family actually has met that person too would probably be a good idea so that they not like show up at the door. Hi.
Yeah, I got the feeling he might have been single because, and if he was, that's a wonderful plan because he's got it all worked out. But what a lot of these folks fail to do is go to the family first and say, look, do you want my trains when I pass away? My son doesn't want any of my trains, but he knows that they're worth something and he's going to sell them, which is great. But family first, always family first. Check with the family, and then and maybe one of them will be the appointee. If not, then that's a great plan. It's just the way it was stated.
All right, let's take a listen to Jimmy Anderson.
My name is Jimmy Anderson, and I'm from Prior Lake, Minnesota. I have a comprehensive estate plan that includes the disposition of my model railroad items. Very few are of any substantial value, but I still maintain a database of them and their purchase price and their suggested future home. I do have a couple of structures I've acquired from well-known modelers, and they'll be sent to institutions that will preserve them for future modelers to appreciate. Anything else can be sold at a swap meet, and the proceeds will go to charity. I've recently been tasked with cleaning out my uncle's collection while he is still with us. He has fortunately allowed me to do whatever I see best with his 60-plus year collection of brass and one-of-a-kind items, but I know not everyone will have it that easy. My suggestion is have a plan, write it down, and leave it where it can be easily found by your executor or personal representative. It isn't kind to leave an unorganized mess to those who have to clean it up, especially if they are family members who will already have enough on their minds.
Dave, it sounds like Jimmy's done his homework, hasn't he?
Jimmy's on the money, 100%. Put a lot of thought into this.
These are all smart people. There's a theme
I think
here,
we got.
right?
I think we got to have a plan, right? I think we said that about 100 times, and you know what? We'll say it 100 more times. Have a plan. Have a plan. Have a plan.
Yeah.
So you sit
The
there.
people we've heard from are really on the ball.
A lot of nuance.
Shut off this podcast and go make a plan. That's what we're telling you.
And
if you haven't figured that out already,
these folks get it, and they get that important step of not further burdening the family.
Yeah, they really do.
You've got clearly, Ray. You've got very smart listeners.
I think we do.
And from all over the place too. I'm very impressed, Ray.
Yeah, these are all great answers.
Let's take a listen to Mike O'Dorney.
This is Mike O'Dorney from California, and the first thing I do is I take a clear plastic document pouch, the kind they use at a car mechanic, and it has a hole in it and an eyelet, and I put it on a nail in the garage, and in that I put the rosters of the two clubs I'm in, and I circle the two people in each club that handle estates. The second thing is I get emails every month from somebody passes away, and they ask, where do I take this stuff or send it? And they suggest particular clubs. And around me, there's about a dozen clubs, and each one does some kind of train show to take care of estate type collections. The third thing's kind of a touchy subject. Whenever someone dies, you can get people that prey on widows and come to their house looking for stuff and steal stuff like wallets and laptops. And some of the clubs around here have had incidents with racism and bigotry and sexism and financial hanky-pankies. And I make a note of those clubs and put them in the pouch saying, stay away from these people. And that's where you're going to find that kind of stuff.
Well, we definitely want to avoid the financial hanky-panky. And we want to make sure that our family members are, again, avoiding those vultures.
Yeah.
No one likes to talk about it, but stay away from the people that aren't totally above board, super honest, super politically correct. There's no use, nor do we have the time for folks that aren't going to treat you fairly. So.
Yeah, that trust thing, it's got to be there to be able to make sure that you feel good and make sure your family's being taken care of.
And again, a community of friends, of fellow model railroaders can help you and your survivors avoid those pitfalls.
Or you can do what Rick Gaffney's doing, which is building his family into this. Let's take a listen.
My name is Rick Gaffney, and I'm from St. Charles, Missouri. Started model railroading when I was 10 years old. It was about 60 years ago, and finished my last layout in 91 till I moved back to St. Louis. I started my new layout 2021 in the fall. So my grandson had a great interest in it, and so did his dad, who was a former model railroader himself when he was a kid. So they started building their own layouts. They have 2 HO layouts and an N-scale shelf layout. Then my nephew came over, or my great-nephew came over for Christmas one year and saw the work I was doing on my layout. And now he's got an N-scale, an HO, and an O-scale layout. So I know where my HO trains are going to go. I've got 10 more grandchildren to get some interest in before I go. So I'm sure they'll all find a home within the family.
So there you go. Get your family involved in model railroading. You'll know it's going all to a safe place. But that also brings up a challenge as well of making sure everybody in the family knows the plan before the family infighting and Thanksgiving becomes a disaster.
That's the best plan is a family plan. That was very cool. It just stays in the family, and the layouts live on. That was very nice.
It's wonderful to have that and to have that legacy of bringing people into the hobby.
So whether you're passing your railroad on to family members, or it's going to sale, or it's going to a club, or it's going to friends, or wherever it's going, what's the big theme that we drove home tonight?
Have a plan.
Have a plan. Let's make sure that your plans are written out. Make sure that your family knows where those plans are. Make sure they know what the plan is so they're not opening this document and finding surprises. No surprises after you go away. Make sure everybody knows. And if you need help, if you need planning help, Amherst Railway Society stands ready to help. Again, all those links will be on our website, aroundthelayout.com/172, how to get a hold of those folks and all the resources that make available to everyone. John, Dave, it's been a pleasure seeing you guys once again, and thank you so much for helping us put a plan together.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Ray, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.